The desert stretched endlessly beneath a sky the color of bruised steel, and somewhere in that vastness, 8 men were about to die. The operations center at Bagram fell silent when the distress beacon lit up. Call sign Reaper 6, a Delta Force reconnaissance team pinned down in the Coast Valley, 30 clicks from the nearest forward operating base. Insurgent forces had them boxed in a dried riverbed, and the math was simple: 20 minutes until they were overrun, 15 minutes for the closest Apache gunships to arrive. The numbers didn't work. They never did in that godforsaken corner of Afghanistan where mountains swallowed radio signals and hope died in the dust. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hale stood at the tactical display, jaw working overtime on nothing but stress, watching the red dots converge on the blue. His face had that look career officers get when they're about to lose good men to bad geography. Then someone spoke up from the back of the room, a voice that shouldn't have been there at all. "I can make it in 12. Every head turned. Chief Warrant Officer Kayla Mari stood near the maintenance logs, grease still smudged on her left forearm, eyes locked on the screen with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. She wore a standard-issue flight suit that had seen better days, and her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun that had started to come loose hours ago. Nobody moved. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Hale's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, confusion, something that might have been irritation. Amari wasn't supposed to be in the operations center. She was supposed to be in Hangar 7, elbow-deep in a transmission assembly for a Black Hawk that had been grounded for 3 days. She was a mechanic. A damn good one, sure, but a mechanic. The pilot roster was clear. The duty assignments were set. This wasn't how things worked. "Chief Warrant Officer," Hale said slowly, each word measured and cold, "you're not on flight status. You're maintenance. Return to your station." Amari didn't move. Her eyes stayed on that screen, on those red dots creeping closer to the blue, on the countdown that nobody wanted to acknowledge. 8 men. 8 lives measured in minutes and fuel calculations, and the distance between what the rulebook said and what reality demanded. She had flown Black Hawks for 6 years before an incident in Kandahar put her behind a wrench instead of a cyclic stick. 6 years of dust-offs and extractions, of pulling wounded soldiers out of hot zones while tracer rounds painted lines through the night. 6 years of being very, very good at something the Army decided she couldn't do anymore. Not because she couldn't, but because she had. "Sir," she said quietly, "that bird in Hangar 7 just passed pre-flight. I finished the work an hour ago." The room felt smaller suddenly. Someone coughed. A radio crackled with static from another channel. Hale's face hardened into something unreadable, the look of a man caught between protocol and the ticking clock. He knew her record. Everyone in theater knew the story, even if nobody talked about it directly. Kandahar 2 years back. A hot extract gone wrong. Her co-pilot dead in the seat beside her, hydraulics failing, small arms fire punching holes through the fuselage. She'd kept that Black Hawk in the air on nothing but skill and fury long enough to get 11 Rangers back to base. Then she'd set it down, climbed out, and hadn't flown since. Not because she was grounded by injury, not because she failed some evaluation. The official report said extended maintenance rotation pending psychological assessment. The unofficial truth was simpler. She'd asked for it, requested the transfer herself. Nobody understood why. Nobody asked. Now she stood in an operations center she had no authorization to enter, volunteering for a mission she had no clearance to fly, and the math was still brutally simple. 12 minutes. She could make it in 12. Hale looked at the screen again. The red dots were closing. Reaper 6's last transmission had been clipped, professional, the kind of calm that came from men who knew exactly how bad things were. Heavy contact, multiple casualties, request immediate CAS. Close air support. They needed guns in the sky, and they needed them before the math ran out. The colonel's hand moved to the radio handset, then stopped. His eyes found Amari again, searching for something: doubt, hesitation, anything that would make this decision easier. He found nothing but steady resolve. She'd already made her choice. She'd made it the moment she walked into this room instead of staying where she belonged. The question was whether he'd let her. "You haven't flown in 2 years," he said. "No, sir," Amari replied. 733 days. The specificity of that number said everything. She'd counted every single one. Hale's jaw tightened. Another voice cut through the tension, Captain Rodriguez from Air Operations, younger, less weathered by compromise. "Sir, the Apache flight is still 14 mics out. They're pushing hard, but they're not going to make it. 14 minutes. Reaper 6 didn't have 14 minutes. The insurgents knew exactly what they had, knew the terrain, knew the timelines. This was a kill box, and it was closing." Hale closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When he opened them, something had shifted. Not approval exactly, more like resignation to the inevitable. "If you crash my Black Hawk, Chief Warrant Officer, I will personally write the report that ends your career permanently." Amari's response was immediate, delivered without a trace of humor or bravado. "Understood, sir. I'll bring her back clean." She was already moving toward the door before anyone could reconsider. Her boots hit the tarmac 90 seconds later, and the night air hit her face like a memory she tried to bury. Hangar 7 loomed ahead, a dark cathedral of metal and machinery. The Black Hawk sat inside like a patient predator, rotor blades folded, fuselage painted in the matte gray that ate light and made helicopters disappear against mountain backgrounds. Tail number 8743. She knew this bird. Had rebuilt its turbine engine herself 3 weeks ago, replaced the tail rotor gearbox, recalibrated the flight control systems until they responded with the kind of precision that separated good maintenance from art. Her hands moved on autopilot through the pre-flight checklist. Turbine temperatures normal, fuel levels good, control surfaces free and correct. The cockpit smelled like hydraulic fluid and old leather, familiar as breathing. Her fingers found the switches and instruments without looking, muscle memory carved so deep it bypassed conscious thought entirely. The checklist said she needed a co-pilot. The checklist said she needed ground crew for startup procedures. The checklist said a lot of things, and Reaper 6 was dying while she followed regulations. She fired up the auxiliary power unit herself. The turbines began their ascending whine, that beautiful, terrible sound of controlled explosions becoming thrust. The tower was already calling her designation, confusion evident in the radio operator's voice. "Hangar 7, this is Tower. We show unauthorized engine start on Black Hawk 8743. Confirm status." Amari keyed the mic, her voice steady, professional, utterly calm. "Tower, this is Wildcard. I am wheels up in 90 seconds for emergency CAS mission, Coast Valley. Authorization direct from Colonel Hale. Clear me for immediate departure, taxiway Charlie." A pause. She could almost hear the tower crew scrambling to verify, to check rosters, to make sense of a call scene that hadn't been active in 733 days. Wildcard. They'd given it to her after the 3rd time she'd pulled off an extraction everyone said was impossible. Wildcard, because she played hands nobody else would touch and somehow walked away winning. Then Kandahar happened, and the name became a ghost. "Wildcard," the tower operator said finally, voice tight with something between awe and concern. "You are cleared for immediate departure. Godspeed." The collective pitch came up smooth and responsive. The Black Hawk lifted on its own weight, rising into the darkness like it had been waiting for this moment. The altimeter climbed. The valley spread out below her, invisible in the moonless night except for scattered lights marking villages and compounds. She pushed the cyclic forward and felt the familiar acceleration, the airframe shuddering slightly as it transitioned from hover to forward flight. 80 knots, 100. The turbines sang their high-pitched song and the darkness swallowed her whole. The radio crackled in her helmet. "Wildcard, Reaper 6. We are taking heavy fire from multiple positions. 2 urgent casualties. Estimate 10 minutes before position is overrun." The voice was tight but controlled. Delta operators didn't panic, they calculated, and right now the calculations said they were dead men talking. "Reaper 6 Wildcard," Amari responded, her voice carrying none of the emotion churning through her chest. "I am 8 mics from your position. Mark your location with IR strobe. Stay tight. 8 minutes." She could shave that to 7 if she pushed the bird past recommended cruise speed. The question was whether the insurgents would give Reaper 6 even that much time. She dropped lower, using the terrain for cover, the way her first instructor had taught her a lifetime ago. Mountains rose on either side like the walls of a canyon designed by a hostile god. The navigation system showed her position as a green icon crawling across a topographic map that looked more like abstract art than terrain. Every ridge could hide a technical vehicle with a heavy machine gun. Every valley could funnel her into a kill zone. Flying nap of the earth in total darkness was the kind of thing that separated the competent from the exceptional, and the exceptional from the lucky. Amari had never relied much on luck. 6 minutes out, the radio chatter intensified. Other aircraft were repositioning, trying to get assets into play, but they were still too far out. The Apache flight was pushing their birds to the edge of operational limits and still coming up short. Somewhere in a tactical operations center, people were watching her green icon move across screens, holding their collective breath. In the back of her mind, unwanted and intrusive, memories tried to surface. The smell of blood and aviation fuel, the sound of her co-pilot's labored breathing, then the absence of sound. The way the stick had fought her as hydraulic systems failed one by one. She shoved the memories down with the same ruthless efficiency she used for everything else. There was no room for that now. Now there was only airspeed and altitude, and the narrowing gap between her position and 8 men who needed her to be exactly as good as she used to be. 4 minutes. The coast valley opened up ahead, a darkness within darkness. Her instruments showed elevation changes, power lines marked on the map as red danger zones, clusters of buildings that could hide anything. The IR camera mounted under the nose painted the world in shades of gray and white, heat signatures blooming like flowers where vehicles and people disturbed the cold desert night. Then she saw them. Reaper 6's IR strobe pulsed in a dried riverbed, a tiny beacon of desperation. And around them, scattered across the high ground, muzzle flashes sparkled like malevolent stars. The insurgents had positions on 3 sides, classic L-shaped ambush formation, pouring fire into a kill zone with nowhere to hide. Amari's hands moved before conscious thought finished forming. She broke right, gaining altitude for angle of attack, her thumb already moving to the weapons selector. The Black Hawk wasn't a gunship. She carried door guns, 7.62 miniguns mounted on either side, meant for defensive suppression more than offensive strikes. But in the right hands, with the right angle, even defensive weapons could make God himself reconsider his position. Reaper 6, wildcard is inbound. Danger close on your north ridge. Keep your heads down. She banked hard, feeling the G-forces press her into the seat, and brought the bird into a diving attack run that would have made her instructor either proud or horrified. Probably both. The night exploded. Tracer rounds arced up toward her, lazy-looking lines of light that concealed bullets moving faster than sound. The miniguns opened up with that distinctive buzzsaw roar, 6,000 rounds per minute turning air into copper-jacketed violence. Her first pass walked fire across the northern ridge, where the heaviest concentration of muzzle flashes betrayed insurgent positions. Dust and debris erupted. Heat signatures scattered. She pulled up hard, cyclic back, collective up, dancing the Black Hawk through evasive maneuvers that made the airframe groan. Good hits, wildcard. Reaper 6's voice carried the first hint of hope. North Ridge is suppressing. We've got movement on the east slope. She was already repositioning, reading the terrain like a language she'd learned before speech. The east slope was lower, closer to the riverbed, which meant her attack angle had to be steeper to avoid hitting friendly positions. Danger close wasn't a suggestion in this situation. It was geometry measured in feet, not yards. The second pass came in faster, lower. She could see them now through the IR camera, figures moving between rocks, the distinctive heat signature of a heavy machine gun position. The minigun found them with surgical precision. The Black Hawk shuddered with recoil as hundreds of rounds cycled through the weapon system. Return fire came heavier this time. Something pinged off the armored belly of the aircraft. Warning lights flickered on her instrument panel, minor damage. System still green, but a reminder that luck was finite and eventually ran out. Wildcard, be advised we have technical vehicle approaching from the south. Looks like a truck-mounted heavy weapon. Amari's eyes found the threat immediately. A pickup truck racing across the valley floor, something large and lethal mounted in the bed. Probably a DSHK heavy machine gun, Soviet-era but still perfectly capable of shredding a helicopter's thin skin. If that weapon got into position, it would turn the Black Hawk into a flying coffin. She had seconds to make a choice. The truck was moving fast, kicking up a dust trail visible even in infrared. Her weapons were designed for area suppression, not precision strikes against moving vehicles. The correct tactical decision was to call for the Apache flight, let the gunships handle it with their Hellfire missiles and chain guns. But the Apache were still 4 minutes out, and this truck would reach firing position in less than 2. There was no correct decision. There was only the choice that gave Reaper 6 the best chance to survive the next 60 seconds. Amari rolled the Black Hawk into an angle that shouldn't have been possible for an aircraft not designed for aerobatics, pointed the nose almost straight down, and opened up with everything. The minigun stream walked toward the truck like a line drawn by an angry god. Dust erupted. The truck swerved, driver realizing too late that he'd become the target instead of the hunter. Rounds impacted the engine block, the cab, the bed where the heavy weapon sat. The vehicle shuddered, slewed sideways, and rolled in a cloud of dust and debris. Amari pulled out of the dive hard enough to feel her vision narrow at the edges, gray creeping in from peripheral vision as G-forces tried to drag consciousness away. She breathed through it, technique and training overriding biology, and leveled out at 200 feet. Her hands were shaking slightly. She noticed but didn't acknowledge it. The radio was alive with chatter. The Apache flight was 2 minutes out now. Another Black Hawk was inbound for the actual extraction. All Amari had to do was keep Reaper 6 alive for another 120 seconds. It felt like a lifetime. She set up a racetrack pattern over the riverbed, making herself a target, drawing fire away from the men on the ground. The insurgents weren't stupid. They knew what she was doing, knew that shooting down the helicopter was now their priority. Tracers filled the night sky, reaching up for her with lazy persistence. She jinked and weaved, never staying on a predictable path, burning through fuel and altitude like they were infinite resources. 100 seconds. Something hit the tail boom hard enough that she felt it through the entire airframe. New warning lights appeared, hydraulic pressure dropping in the secondary system, but the primary held steady. The Black Hawk kept flying because that's what these machines did. They took punishment that would kill anything else and kept their crews alive through sheer engineering stubbornness. 80 seconds. The Apache flight called in, their voices professional but tinged with something that might have been admiration. Wildcard, Reaper 11 has visual on your position. We are engaging targets now. Beautiful work up there. The sky filled with the deeper thunder of Apache chain guns, the whoosh of rockets finding their marks. The insurgent fire slackened as survival instincts overrode tactical considerations. You couldn't win against Apache. You could only try to live through the encounter. 60 seconds. The extraction Black Hawk, callsign Dustoff 3, swept into the riverbed with the kind of aggressive flying that marked an experienced combat pilot. Amari held her position, still drawing whatever fire remained, watching through her IR camera as Reaper 6's 8 shapes, no 6, 2 were being carried, moved toward the waiting helicopter. 30 seconds. Dustoff 3 pulled pitch and climbed out, precious cargo secured, mission accomplished. The Apache flight was systematically dismantling what remained of the insurgent positions, and Amari finally allowed herself to breathe. Wildcard Reaper 6. The voice on the radio was different now, rough with exhaustion and something else. Thanks for the save, we owe you. She wanted to say something appropriate, something that matched the gravity of what had just happened. Instead, what came out was, just returning a favor, stay safe down there. The flight back to Bagram felt longer than the flight out, even though she wasn't pushing the envelope anymore. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind the hollow feeling that always followed combat. Her hands had stopped shaking. That bothered her more than when they'd been trembling. The tower guided her in with unusual gentleness, clearing her straight to the hangar without the usual pattern work. Someone had spread the word. When she set the Black Hawk down, gentle as falling snow despite the damage to the tail boom, there was a crowd waiting, not cheering. Soldiers didn't do that, but watching with the kind of attention that meant something had shifted. Colonel Hale stood near the hangar entrance, arms crossed, face still unreadable. Amari shut down the turbines, completed the post-flight checklist with methodical precision, and climbed out expecting anything from a medal to court-martial. Neither came. Hale walked over slowly, inspecting the bullet holes in the tail boom, the scorch marks on the belly, the general state of a helicopter that had just survived something it shouldn't have. "Your maintenance work is excellent, Chief Warrant Officer," he said finally. "This bird flew exactly how it was supposed to." It took her a moment to understand what he wasn't saying. That she'd been right. That the work she'd done mattered. That maybe, just maybe, being grounded hadn't been punishment but protection from herself. "Thank you, sir," she managed. Hale looked at her directly then, and his expression softened by perhaps 1 degree. "Your flight status pending full review. Medical, psych eval, the whole process. But off the record," he paused, and something that might have been a smile touched his eyes. "We need pilots who fly like that. We've always needed pilots who fly like that." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing in the harsh glare of hangar lights with the smell of burned aviation fuel in her nostrils and 734 days of self-imposed exile finally ending. The gathered soldiers began to disperse, but not before several of them, crew chiefs, mechanics, other pilots, made brief eye contact, nods of recognition. The silent acknowledgement that passed between people who understood what it meant to climb back into something that had nearly destroyed you. Someone had spray-painted a new marking on her bird's fuselage while she was gone. Rough, unofficial, the kind of thing that would get scrubbed off before any official inspection. But for now it stayed, a wild card playing card symbol, surrounded by 8 small stars. One for each life saved tonight. Amari touched it briefly, fingers tracing the crude outline, and felt something unlock in her chest that she'd kept welded shut since Kandahar. Not healing, exactly, but the possibility of it. The beginning of understanding that what had happened wasn't the end of her story. It was just the part where everything changed. She turned back toward the operations center, toward the debriefing she knew was waiting, toward the future that had suddenly reopened when she thought all the doors were closed. The desert wind carried the smell of jet fuel and dust, and somewhere overhead the stars watched with indifferent clarity. The math had worked out after all. She'd made it in 12 minutes. 8 men lived who would have died. And Kale Amari was a pilot again. Everything else would figure itself out eventually. The debrief took 4 hours. They walked through every second of the mission, every decision point, every risk calculation. Amari answered their questions with the same calm precision she'd used in the cockpit, providing no more or less information than requested. The intelligence officers wanted tactical details. The flight surgeons wanted to assess her mental state. The command staff wanted to understand how a grounded mechanic had pulled off a textbook combat rescue without co-pilot, without crew chief, without any of the support systems that normally kept Black Hawk pilots alive in hostile territory. She told them the truth. She'd done what needed doing with what was available. The bureaucratic machinery would take time to process everything, to update records, to make official what had happened unofficially. Until then, she was in a strange limbo, no longer purely maintenance but not yet restored to flight status. The other pilots treated her differently now. Not with the careful distance they'd maintained for 2 years, but not quite as an equal either. Something in between. Respect mixed with uncertainty. They'd heard the recordings. They knew what she'd done. But they also knew the story of Kandahar, the incident that had sent her to the maintenance bay in the first place. Nobody asked about it directly. That wasn't how it worked. 3 days passed. She worked on helicopters during the day, lost herself in the mechanical precision of turbine engines and hydraulic systems. At night she lay in her bunk and didn't dream, which was its own small victory. On the fourth day, Captain Rodriguez found her in Hangar 7, shoulder deep in an avionics panel. "Colonel wants to see you," Rodriguez said. "His office, 15 minutes, might want to clean up first." The "might want to" was generous. She had grease up to her elbows and probably smudged across her face, but the tone suggested this wasn't optional. Amari cleaned up as best she could in the hangar washroom, changed into a fresh flight suit, and made her way across the base. Bagram sprawled like a small city, all concrete barriers and prefab buildings, the Hindu Kush mountains looming in eternal judgment over everything. Hale's office was in the headquarters building, a room that managed to feel both Spartan and suffocating. Maps covered every wall. Status boards tracked every asset in theater. The colonel sat behind a desk that looked like it had seen service in 3 different wars. "Close the door, Chief Warrant Officer," he said without looking up from whatever report he was reading. She did. The silence stretched. Finally, Hale set down his pen and met her eyes. "Your medical eval came back clean. Psych assessment is pending, but preliminary results are favorable. Flight status can be restored within 72 hours, assuming you want it restored." Amari had been ready for many things. Direct questions, reprimands for bypassing protocol, even grudging acknowledgement of a mission well done. She had not been ready for this. "Sir, I'm asking if you want to fly again," Hale said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Not because we need pilots, though we do. Not because you proved something out there, though you did. I'm asking because 2 years ago you requested maintenance rotation yourself. You chose to stop flying. The question is whether that choice still stands." It was a fair question. It deserved a fair answer. Amari thought about Kandahar. About the night her co-pilot died and she didn't. About the guilt that had become a constant companion, the survivor's arithmetic that never quite added up. She thought about the Black Hawk's cockpit, about the feeling of making an aircraft do exactly what needed doing despite physics and fear. She thought about Reaper 6's 6 survivors, walking away from that riverbed when all the math said they should be dead. "I chose to stop because I thought I was dangerous," she said finally. "I thought if I kept flying, I'd get more people killed, that one day my luck would run out and I'd take someone with me. And now, I think maybe the dangerous thing was staying on the ground." Hale nodded slowly, like this was the answer he'd expected but needed to hear confirmed. He pulled a folder from his desk drawer and slid it across to her. "There's a position opening up, training command at Fort Rucker, teaching new pilots how not to die. It's stateside, safe. Good career move for someone looking to transition out of combat operations." Amari opened the folder. It was a formal offer, everything official and proper. A way out. A way to keep flying without the risk, without the weight of other people's lives sitting on every decision. It was exactly what she would have wanted 3 days ago. "And if I don't want that?" she asked. Hale's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, approval maybe, or recognition of something he understood better than most. "Then you report to flight operations tomorrow at 0600. We have work to do." The choice was hers. It had always been hers. 2 years ago she'd chosen safety and nearly disappeared into it. Now she was choosing something else. Not recklessness. Not a death wish. Just the understanding that some people were built for certain kinds of work and fighting against that was its own form of destruction. "I'll be there at 0600, sir," she said. Hale stood and extended his hand. The gesture was rare enough to mean something. "Welcome back to the war, wildcard." They shook, and Amari left his office feeling lighter than she had in 737 days. The afternoon sun hit her face like absolution. Tomorrow she'd fly again. Tonight she'd sleep, and maybe this time the dreams would be different. The next morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of weather that made flying a pleasure rather than a battle against the elements. Amari reported to flight operations exactly on time and found herself assigned to a routine supply run to a forward operating base near Jalalabad. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that would make anyone write reports or record radio traffic for later analysis. Just flying, pure and simple. Her co-pilot was a young warrant officer named Martinez, fresh enough that his flight suit still had crisp creases and his helmet bag looked brand new. He tried to hide his nervousness when he realized who he'd been paired with, failed completely. "Relax," Amari said as they walked through pre-flight. I promise not to do anything exciting today. Martinez managed a weak smile. No offense, ma'am, but your definition of exciting scares me. Fair enough. They launched on schedule, the Black Hawk lifting into crystalline air with the kind of smooth authority that came from perfect maintenance and competent flying. Amari let Martinez take the controls for most of the flight, offering occasional corrections, but mostly just watching him work through the mechanics of navigation and communication. He was adequate. That was the best description. Technically proficient but lacking the instinct that separated pilots from great pilots. That would come with time and experience if he survived long enough to accumulate both. The supply run went exactly as planned. They landed, ground crew offloaded cargo, they departed. Textbook. Boring. Absolutely perfect. On the flight back, Martinez worked up the courage to ask the question everyone wanted to ask but nobody did. Is it true what they say about Kandahar? Amari kept her eyes on the horizon, watching the mountains slide past. Depends what they say. That you flew a dying helicopter for 30 minutes with a dead co-pilot in the seat next to you. That you brought back 11 Rangers who should have died. That the Black Hawk was so shot up they scrapped it for parts because repair wasn't economically viable. The helicopter flew for 23 minutes, not 30, Amari said quietly. And they didn't scrap it. They put it in a museum at Fort Campbell, tail number 6647. You can go see it if you're ever there. Martinez absorbed this in silence for a while. Then, why'd you stop flying? It was the real question, the one that mattered. Amari considered several answers, the official ones, the polite ones, the versions that made sense in after-action reports. She gave him the truth instead. Because my co-pilot was 22 years old and died before he really lived, and I was the senior pilot, and I kept flying when maybe I should have put down sooner. And I couldn't figure out if I was brave or reckless or just lucky, and that scared me more than the bullets did. And now, Martinez asked, unconsciously echoing Hale's question from days before. Now I think maybe those categories aren't as different as I wanted them to be. Brave, reckless, lucky, they're all the same thing from different angles. The only thing that matters is whether you're doing the work that needs doing. Martinez thought about that for the rest of the flight. Amari let him. Some lessons couldn't be taught, only discovered. They landed back at Bagram without incident, logged the flight, secured the aircraft, did all the mundane things that made up 99% of military aviation. It felt like coming home. Over the following weeks, Amari settled into a rhythm: morning flights, afternoon maintenance, evening briefings, the work of keeping helicopters in the air and soldiers supplied and missions accomplished. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would generate stories or recognition, just the daily grind of being good at something difficult. But word had spread. The story of the mechanic who'd saved Reaper 6 traveled through the informal networks that connected every base, every unit, every soldier who'd ever relied on aviation to save their lives. Details got embellished in the retelling. The number of insurgents grew. The damage to her helicopter became more severe, her maneuvers more impossible. Amari ignored most of it, but she noticed when younger pilots started seeking her out, asking questions about technique and decision-making. Noticed when crew chiefs requested her specifically for complex missions. Noticed the way Delta operators would nod to her in the chow hall, the subtle acknowledgement that passed between people who'd shared foxholes or landing zones, or those moments when everything hung on someone being exactly good enough. She'd become something she'd never intended, a legend in progress. One afternoon, 6 weeks after the Coast Valley mission, Amari was working on yet another transmission assembly when a shadow fell across her workspace. She looked up to find a Delta operator standing there, full kit, ready for deployment. The man was built like violence refined into human form, all efficiency and hard edges. Chief Warrant Officer Amari, that's me. Senior Chief Thompson, Reaper 6. He extended his hand. Wanted to say thanks properly before we rotate back stateside. Amari set down her tools and shook his hand. His grip was firm, scarred, the hand of someone who'd done terrible things for necessary reasons. You already thanked me over the radio, she said. That was immediate. This is different. Thompson pulled something from his pocket, a small patch, subdued colors depicting a Grim Reaper holding a playing card. "We had these made. Whole team signed the back. Figured you earned it." She took the patch carefully. On the back, 8 signatures in permanent marker, 8 names she'd never met but would remember forever. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Thompson replied. "Just know that we see you. What you did, what it cost, we carry that with us." He gave her a short nod and walked away, back to whatever mission was pulling him into the darkness. Amari stood in the hangar holding the patch, surrounded by the smell of hydraulic fluid and turbine exhaust, and felt something fundamental shift. She'd spent 2 years trying to be invisible, to disappear into maintenance work and avoid the weight of other people's survival. But invisibility was impossible. Everything mattered. Every repair she made, every flight she flew, every decision about risk and timing and acceptable losses, it all rippled outward in ways she couldn't predict or control. Thompson was right. It cost. It would always cost. The question was whether the cost was worth paying. Amari pinned the patch to her flight suit, right below her name tape, and got back to work. The transmission wasn't going to fix itself, and somewhere in this theater, someone would need this helicopter to be perfect when the moment came. 3 months passed. The war continued with its usual rhythm of boredom and terror, routine and chaos. Amari flew medevac missions and supply runs, ash and trash operations, and the occasional combat rescue. She accumulated flight hours like other people accumulated regrets, steadily, inevitably, with increasing skill. Martinez improved under her instruction, losing the nervous edge that marked inexperienced pilots and gaining the quiet confidence that came from not dying repeatedly. Other co-pilots rotated through. She trained them all with the same methodical patience she applied to everything else. Some would become great pilots. Some would remain adequate. All of them would learn from her, absorbing lessons about risk management and emergency procedures and the 1,000 small decisions that kept helicopters flying when everything said they should fall. Then came the mission that changed everything again. The briefing happened at 0300, which was never a good sign. Amari and 5 other Black Hawk crews gathered in the operations center, while intelligence officers explained the situation with the careful neutrality of people describing other people's potential death. A high-value target had been located in a compound near the Pakistan border. Special operations would conduct the raid. Aviation would provide insertion, overwatch, and extraction. Standard operation, textbook planning. Except the compound was in a valley with exactly one approach corridor, surrounded by terrain that would turn helicopters into target practice if anything went wrong. "Expected resistance is heavy," the intelligence officer said, pointing to aerial photographs that showed defensive positions and weapons emplacements. "We're looking at prepared fighting positions, heavy machine guns, possibly RPGs. The assault force will move fast, but you'll be exposed during insertion." Amari studied the terrain with the focus of someone who'd learned to read death in topographic lines. The approach was a nightmare: high walls on both sides, no maneuvering room, perfect ambush geometry. Whoever planned this compound's location understood exactly how to neutralize American advantages. "What's our priority?" another pilot asked. "Get the assault force in. Keep them supplied during the objective. Get them out." Standard template. Standard, except nothing about this was standard. Every pilot in the room knew it. You could see it in the way they studied the maps, in the questions they didn't ask. This was the kind of mission where people earned medals posthumously. Colonel Hale stood at the back of the room, watching the briefing with hooded eyes. When the intelligence officer finished, Hale spoke up. "Wildcard will lead the insertion flight." Heads turned. Amari felt the weight of attention, but